and welcome back to the Gen 10 Theater, and today we're going to take a look at a book that I just finished, and that is Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. Now, this is one of the more weirder stories that I've ever read from Star Wars, and it even includes anything I've ever seen, except for maybe the holiday special, but it's still pretty weird at that. So, this is going to contain all kinds of spoilers, because I'm going to pretty much go over the storyline and just how it has its moments of just being off the wall. So it starts off with Luke calling in this author or playwright or whatever you want to call him. He pretty much writes the equivalent of what we have as movies. They call them holodramas. And he wants him to write a story about Luke who is shown in his more true nature. Because everything that he's seen so far makes him out to be this extreme hero who can never be destroyed. He's like the craziest thing that has ever lived, which, to people who don't know what the Jedi are, I guess that makes a lot of sense. But Luke, has a side of him that feels guilty about anytime he has to kill somebody, and he wants people to know, hey, I have two sides, sometimes I can't save everybody, things along that line. So that's kind of like a prologue chapter. And then he dives into the book, and it doesn't really tell you, but you're kind of like diving into this holodrama. The whole book is written that way, so some of the dialogue is just over the top with all kinds of like references to like the Earth equivalent. Like instead of a table, they would call it, like a parallel platform station or something stupid like that. There was something about, I can't remember now, something about like things even like bananas or something as simple as fruit or like fireworks. They have their own words for it. And there's a lot of that throughout the story. But the story itself is pretty much typical Star Wars. The original gang always ends up having to save each other. This person gets captured, then, oh, we gotta go save him. Oh, that guy gets in trouble because he's trying to save him. So the third group runs in. It's very much rinse and repeat in that nature. But the story itself is kind of strange, because you're dealing with a thing that they call the dark. And it's not the dark side. The main villain of this book thinks he's got some connection beyond the Force called the dark, which really, the whole thing seems like a metaphor of just the void of death, because he says the dark is just the emptiness, the lack of anything, the end of everything, where there is no energy left in the universe. And the villain's always saying how it's calling to him. So he is trying to embrace that and kind of take over the empire, the universe, what was the empire. But instead of having the idea of like building up something, his point of the whole thing is to destroy everything. So Luke arrives on this planet, which he's really showing up there to kind of ease over everything. And he quickly kind of figures out that there's a bunch of nonsense going on. But what he doesn't realize is the rocks around him are alive. And there's this kind of material that is a living rock called melt mastiff or something like that. And it pretty much has the equivalent of a stun gun. As soon as it touches you, you got hit by a melter. You just kind of collapse because you've been stunned. And, Luke ends up getting taken over by this shadow, or he goes by many names in this thing. I think his real name is Chronal, but then sometimes it's Shadow Sun, sometimes they call him Black Hole. It's just so many versions. As the story goes on, they change the name as you realize, oh, it's not him. He's being controlled by him, and he's being controlled by him, and it just kind of like bounces back across all these people. So it's pretty much, the story kind of even reminds me of the Truce of Baccarat, which is technically like within a year or so of this story. It's pretty much in the same time frame, where in that one they're taking over people's minds and turning them into these machines, where in this one they're taking over people's minds and turning them into puppets. So it's kind of another mind control story. Now, where this thing really starts to fly off the handle, and what makes it a little hard to read sometimes, is the way it's written. Things will go on a tangent for no reason, trying to describe something as simple as like the color of a rock. and it'll go on for 5 pages on how it's an existential crisis about how it's not this shape, but if they only knew about this, then they can have this. It's almost like the rambling of an anime. It reminds me of when you had like Dragon Ball Z, and the characters are charging up for 3 episodes, and they have this mind dialogue going on about, this is happening and I can do this, but I have to make sure I'm this and blah 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 blah. I mean, you even had R2D2 here, who had a 3-page essay about how he was trying to figure out how to file these natives on a planet. I can't put them here, but I'm going to record their voices, and maybe C3PO can understand what they're saying, but I'm going to wipe that section of my memory just so I make sure I don't remember. So maybe we could have this little game that we play with each other, and then maybe I can guess it before he does. But then after all that is said and done, maybe he'll know what they're called, and then maybe I can put that in this file, but maybe I should put it over here. Oh wait, my foot is broken. That's pretty much how this book went. There was just like 8 pages where a chapter should be done, but then they go 8 more pages of somebody who's having a rant with themselves, and it really sometimes made it hard to read. There was like 3 or 4 times where I'm like, all right, how many pages of this? And I'm just like, oh, please let it stop. Please let it. Oh, okay, here we are, 5 pages later. And you start thinking, well, should I just skip that? Because I know nothing's going to happen here. It's just going to be some more, somebody discussing the shape of a handle, for 5 pages or something crazy like that. But then, when they stopped ranting to themselves, the book was actually really good. The action sequences are great. You even have, things that you don't normally think about. Like, they went into detail about Han Solo's gun, how the smugglers have, like, a reserve where you can make it look like you're out of ammo, but you hit the button, and all of a sudden you got 3 more shots or something like that. And then, of course, in every Star Wars book, the Millennium Falcon gets almost destroyed, and at this point, I'm surprised there's anything left of that ship, because in the movies and in all the books, it's constantly getting beat up and shot at and hit with rocks and crushed. Somehow it's still around. Chewbacca must be pretty good with a welder. And yeah, that happens in this one. You end up meeting the Mindorese clan, who is led by this lady who's, I guess, looking for her lover, boyfriend, husband. Never really says. So she steals the ship from Han Solo so she can try to like navigate and find him and all that. And yeah, it's an interesting tale, but it's got a lot of like rehashed content. But there wasn't much in terms of, like lightsaber action. Luke fights somebody for like 10 seconds in the beginning of the book. Somebody who's just under mind control, has no idea what they're doing, so it turns out to be the one girl's boyfriend, husband, whatever. And he just kind of like, oh, I see you really don't know what you're doing. Okay, knock the sword out of your hand. And it turns out it was all a setup. It was trying to get Luke to defeat the Shadow Spawn Emperor. And then they crowned him Emperor. And then the whole mind control thing is, oh, well, now Emperor Luke, he's our Emperor. He's the good Luke guy. But secretly, he's being controlled by Chrono using the mind control crystal things. So it has a very interesting subplot, and I even think the main plot is the subplot, because it kind of just goes off the handle so many times, which is ranting about things. But it can be entertaining. The whole, like, concept of the dark and these magical crystals that can control your mind, it's interesting. It's different. I mean, I haven't read everything, so maybe they've done that. This does borrow on things. This did come out later on. This was after all the prequels came out, so there are a lot more mentions of things that happened in the prequels. There's a lot of talk about Anakin Skywalker and, knowing who he was, the Clone Wars, the Mandalorians, although it's not, I don't want to say it's like quite where they settled in the Mandalorians, because this was, I think, pre-Clone Wars cartoon. So the Mandalorians weren't 100% developed, but they're still in here. There's a whole faction of them. They still are like the strongest fighters, the most determined ever. So yeah, it's got a lot of things that make it interesting. A lot of it because it's referencing a lot of different points throughout the timeline. It's a good subplot, but you go through the whole book and you get to the very end and you realize that yes, this whole thing was written by the character in the beginning, as the hollow drama, which then Luke hates it. He thinks that it was overdone and like, oh, I never did that, I never said that, you're exaggerating all these things. And then it all makes sense at that point. It's like, oh, this book was crazy because it was designed to be crazy. So, in that aspect alone, it's worth reading because it does what it intended to do very well, and that is be a story within a story, and that story itself is crazy. So, I'd check it out anyway. You can get these things so cheap on Amazon now. It's worth checking out for the $5-6 you spend. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.